Okay, I have a presentation. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. The introduction. Is great to be here to present some of the research work that we have done at the center. Apologies to those who have seen that. This is a series of academic research that we have run for some time. We are in a session looking at how to build resilience, and the focus of our work is on media and journalism. And what I'm going to talk today is about the four models of news ecologies that we see emerging in Europe. And how we have done that when it comes to methodology, we have studied for years ownership structures in the media. We have studied the audience of media outlets, but also a very important entry point, and this is what we have used in our work, is funding. If you really look at the sources of funding in the media, you understand a lot, and if you look at how they travel in a media market, you kind of understand a lot of the health of that information system and of the journalism system. When it comes to media, you have, and this is historically true, we have four key sources of funding that we have analyzed: state funding in the form of government subsidies, state advertising, tax incentives. We have commercial funds, but mostly advertising. We have what we call audience wallets, and this is when people in the old days paid for a copy of the newspaper, these days subscriptions, and a source of funding very important for especially for this region, philanthropic or donor funding. There is another one that I would touch on, which is informal payments, the forms of financial corruption that we see in various countries, and again, that's very relevant for our region too. So basically what we have done, we map these sorts of funding, we take them all, we put them, as a student of mine was saying, in an air fryer, and then let's see what is coming out. And what is coming out are, this is work in progress, so we are still analyzing countries and maybe more will come, but we have identified four news ecologies or journalism ecologies across Europe. And starting with the first one, we call it for now the platformized corporate model. This is a model where specific for some Western European countries like France, Spain, Germany, Ireland, where the main source of funding is commercial advertising, and in recent years in some countries also tax subsidies. You might be familiar with the bargaining codes in some places. Also audience wallets, and in some places you also find philanthropic funding, especially foundations that want to reach a certain audience. The type of ownership in these models is business oriented. What is very specific for these countries is that they are characterized by the conglomerate type, and they have a medium to high concentration. The good news in these places is that you have relative independence of journalism, but also because of various factors, and because many of these companies, especially in the publishing area, are owned by families or companies with interests in other fields, you kind of sense some sort of regimentation, some sort of editorial control in various levels. But still, editorial independence is important for this model. Moving to the next model, and this is basically, I think, where we all aim to go. What we call the public interest model, unfortunately, is a rare, phenomenon just present in some Nordic countries. This is a model that is characterized by new forms of taxation. This is that are meant as protection mechanisms for a public service media sector, and on the other hand, a very strong advertising market. So if you look at that, especially if you come from the journalism field, this is the perfect world, and it exists. It still exists in some countries. Unfortunately, in some of these places, public service media come also under attack, so there are some issues that we notice there. In terms of ownership, it's a business-oriented model with medium to high concentration, but also a very strong sense of the market, and I can speak more about that. In terms of journalism, these are the places: Finland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, where we find independent, public interest-oriented journalism, and a very healthy, as I mentioned, balance between commercial and public funding. The third topic, and this is in fact why I wanted to to give you like the broader perspective is because in recent years I spoke and wrote a lot about the capture model, and at some point everybody thought that we have capture everywhere in Europe. We have a capture model that has emerged, especially in this region, and in countries like in Eastern, Southeastern European countries like Hungary is the textbook case, but we saw it in Serbia, in Bulgaria, if I'm wrong, let me know, Turkey. This is a model, first of all, just to make it very clear and to visualize it. Capture, and this has been tested through research, capture appears when four elements appear. One is the control of regulation by the government. The second is when the government achieves control of public service media. The third is use of funding, public funding to control the media in the form of state advertising and other forms of funding. And the fourth is takeover of private businesses. So basically, again, if you work in the media, if you think about these four areas, regulation, public media, public funding, private ownership, you basically control most of the market. So back to this model, what is specific about that is that state funding is dominant, and we have identified what we call the tunnel funnel system. This is a very, I would say funny if it's not tragic, model where basically, you know, if you are in power, if you have the political power, you can build a media empire with taxpayers' money. And you see it in Hungary, and you see it in most of the countries that have that. And how you do it, you basically take money from the public budget, you tunnel it to the private companies. They don't have to be media companies. And then those companies, usually owned by oligarchs, they buy media outlets on your behalf and they turn them into propaganda outlets. So at the end of the day, and that means that you funnel the money. So at the end of the day, you are in power, you use the taxpayers' money, and you build the media you want as we see that. In terms of ownership, this is a model, again, with state-controlled levels, high levels of financial corruption, obviously, high levels of concentration, and also in some countries, this model is developed through family relations. If you look at Turkey, a lot of the owners in the media are, you know, people in the family of the President Erdogan. You have forms of nepotism, and at the end of the day, what you have in these countries is a very small place for independent journalism, and on the other hand, a propaganda, highly instrumentalized journalism system. And finally, and this is a model that we have noticed recently, we thought that with capture we ended it all, but we have what we call the atomized model. And atomized, because it is a very fragmented model with lots of media outlets, and when you look at that, you have the impression, someone would say, this is great, you have a lot of competition there, a lot of diversity, but when you actually look into the ownership structures of this media, it's not like that. It's in fact a model that is characterized by a very high, even higher level of instrumentalization. We find it in many Western Balkan countries, in Romania, Bulgaria sometimes. I think a student of mine had it sometimes here. And what is very important here is that this is a model where you have state funding, commercial revenues, widespread informal payments. This is basically when you pay journalists to write about you, to give you coverage, or you pay media outlets. And of course, these informal payments, they are called informal because they are not tracked in any form. And of course, this is a model that is a specific target for philanthropic and donor funding. When it comes to ownership, we see here trends like mercenary journalism. Journalists just, taking money to cover the topics that people who pay them want to cover. In some places, it's called journalism for sale. It's a model that is characterized by fragmentation. You have literally hundreds and thousands of media outlets, and obviously private interest-driven model. When it comes to journalism, obviously it is a highly instrumentalized system where media outlets do not report the facts, but actually they hire journalists to attack each other. In Romania, a friend of mine who's a scholar told me that it leads to a phenomenon that is called destruction of the journalistic language, because these journalists actually, they do not know anymore how to express themselves in journalistic language. They are hired to attack other media outlets or the owners or the rivals of your owner, of your media outlet's owner. The type of operation is obviously wealth-led, weaponized journalism with a high state interventionism level. And It's, of course, I'm sure you might wonder, what is worse, capture or atomized? The answer is hard to say, but in both places, I think we deal with a great problem in terms of the independence of the media outlets. Now, this is how Europe looks according to our work, our 4 models of news ecologies. You have the green part, which is the corporate model, the public interest model there in the north, and then you have eastern and some countries in southern Europe sharing the captured and atomized model. The gray ones are the countries that we haven't collected the data yet, and again, work in progress. But what does this tell us actually? Well, you have both negative and positive implications for the health of the information sphere that we have. First of all, we have a widening gap between news media ecologies. As you see here, I think the colors on the map tell you the whole story, with a loss of what we call journalistic referentiality. It's a word that is very hard to pronounce. It worked this day, today. And that means basically that if you look at the field, in many of these places, you don't have, the journalism as the lighting in the system, the source of reference for people looking for information, which is an issue that I guess you have been dealing with and covering and speaking about a lot today, today and tomorrow at this conference. Secondly, you see a growing, dominant propaganda narrative across Europe, with the government controlling the media on the rise, and the emergence of new forms of propaganda and disinformation. And again, there is a lot of literature about disinformation, but when you look at the journalism and the media systems in many countries in Europe, the source of disinformation are exactly the governments that in place to actually adopt policies that should fight disinformation. I spoke a lot about the instrumentalization of journalism, specific for this, that is coming with that, where journalism is wealth and politics driven. There is also, when you look at everything happening in journalism across Europe, a problem with the audience disconnect. I'm sure you have followed the increasing number of studies about the news fatigue, the news avoidance, and I think a lot of that is related to these trends. And of course, this is a big issue. I don't have time to cover it in my presentation, but we shouldn't forget about the tech pressure, the influence of the large tech platforms on journalism, which should be also studied to really understand what is happening. When it comes to positive implications for the health of the infosphere, there is, when you have these systems that are highly instrumentalized, that are heavily controlled, that are with a high level of media ownership concentration, you have spaces where you can build actually resilience. And the work we have done more in the field shows that there are new forms and formats of communications that appear especially at the localized level. At local level, media outlets are appearing. Of course, there is not a perfect situation. They do not have the perfect financial sustainable model, but they are appearing and they build new forms of journalism, very often community-led. Also, when we look, because as I said, this work is done based on collecting of financial data, when you look at the data, in fact, there is a certain, in fact, large financial value for journalism in some countries. If you look at a company like The Guardian, last year they had over 230 million pounds in revenues. This is 230 million pounds in revenues. This can actually, I think, fund the journalism ecosystem in Bulgaria, maybe, or North Macedonia. If you look at the company like Marius in Belgium, again, a turnover last year of over 320 million euros and a profit of 50 million euros. And so on. I just picked up some data here to actually show that there is still value, financial value in journalism. Of course, there are many caveats there. There are many issues. In fact, some of these companies are losing money, not all of them. Companies like Agora in Poland, for example, which publishes Gazeta Wyborcza, also has a very healthy, very hefty revenues, but on the other hand, you have to look that they have developed a very complex system. They own many other companies in many other industries, including outdoor advertising and so on. And finally, independent news media, there are increasingly resilient niches in spite of this gloomy picture. We see, as I mentioned, a lot of, or at least some models of financial sustainability in countries like Slovakia, Romania, Czech Republic. And also, we shouldn't forget the powerful investigative journalism networks that we have across Europe, which I guess you know. Addressing the independent journalism problem, I will leave it here because this is, I think, something for us to think about. I'm very happy to take questions, but when it comes to solutions, I guess we come back to that. So leave it here to give time to my wonderful colleagues to speak. Thank you very much.